Good evening. My name is Evan Rodriguez, and welcome to For the Record, where I interview interesting people from all over the blessed state of Wisconsin. This is our first ever episode, and I really hope you enjoy it. Today's guest is a man who has worked for over 2 decades at the local Watertown High School and is currently the president of the Watertown Art Council. Welcome, Dave Pawl.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So, Mr. Pawl, let me get this started with just my first and favorite segment of the show, the 5 questions. And my first question for you is also has something to do with 5. It has been over 5 years since you've been here for Watertown TV doing an interview. That was back with the midday show in 2019, before the world went to hell. So my question for you is, in the past 5 years, what has changed for you the most, either personally, work-related, or just anything?
Okay, yeah. Luckily, work-related, not much has changed. And I think that's a good thing because it means we still have a nice, strong offering of electives at Watertown High School. Art department still is able to give a lot of great opportunities to kids. And I think that's fantastic. In these days of tight budgets and uncertainty, it's nice to be able to say that, which is good. Personally at home, I got a little guy who's not so little anymore. Theo's 9 now. He's into some really cool stuff. We can play nerdy board games together and video games and things like that. So that's been fun, a fun change. And my wife's now in the education field as well, doing environmental education in Waukesha. So some big changes at home, but all for the better, so that's good.
That's amazing that, just so much can change in the span of 5 years, and I'm happy that it's been mainly positive stuff for you. I know for a lot of people, the 5-year split, especially with COVID, was very tough, but I'm really happy that for you, it's been mainly positive.
Yeah, COVID, we just forget that. We just block that out.
Yeah, we just forget it by forgetting that question. So I have another question for you, Mr. Pawl. Every year with your Watertown Art History class, you travel to the Big Apple, New York City. New York City has a lot happening in it. Some good, some bad, some worse. So I want to ask you, what are some of the best stories you have gotten out of the New York trip?
Okay, well, the good news is all good, not the bad. We've always brought every student back home. Every year there's some exciting firsts that happen. Each year we have people who've never been on a plane before, for example, and we kind of get to help them through that, and kind of broaden their perspective a little bit. Every year there's always a fun aha moment when in some of the big museums people are like, is that the real painting or the real sculpture? And it really is. It's not a copy or just an image on a screen. So just sort of that opening people up to a broader world, I think is the biggest joy of it. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm an older fella. We've been doing the trip every year since 2006. And it's neat to see that how over the years, some people have sort of used that as a formative experience. We have some students, well, they're not students anymore. We have some grown-ups who their first experience in New York was on that trip, and now they're living out there or working out there in the arts world. I even have a former student who leads tours to New York now, and his first time out there was on the art history trip. So it's really fun to see it come full circle and kind of inspire people in that way too, as a lifelong passion.
That's amazing that any trip, school-related, but mainly the New York trip, can really just put a spark in people's eyes. Like some people who are like, I don't really think I want to work in New York after visiting, and it's not the movies, it's not what the news says, that they're like, I might want to work here, I might want to live here. And speaking of New York City, when you visit all of those museums, there's a bunch of art in all kinds of different styles, which leads into my next question for you. What kind of art do you specialize in, and yet you still want to try mastering it?
Okay. Primarily, I work in oil paint, and I do feel like I still have not quite got to the style that I wish I had. What I can picture in my head based on the artists that I love or the art movements that inspire me, I don't ever quite produce what I'm imagining. And I think that's what keeps me coming back to it. Because I do other art forms too. I've done video art, collaborations with people. I've done sculpting. I do try other types of paint. But there's something about oil paint that I've seen what it's capable of doing. And I want to try to get myself there. It's kind of a continuing journey.
Yeah. How long have you been doing oil paints for?
Ooh, yeah. In my high school, we didn't have oils at all, so it was just water-based stuff. So when I first went to college, that was my first experience. And I am old enough that that's long ago, and I should be better now than I am. But I remember it just the first maybe 6 months of trying to use it, I just hated it because I was so used to acrylic, which dries right away. And in oil, you know, you can get mud pretty easily if you're not careful. And so at first I wasn't so sold, but then when I saw what it was capable of by going to museums and things like that, it made me want to try to get there, you know. We should try some oils. We'll get you trying some oils.
We certainly could, and you know, that oil paints, you know, it's very much about the artist, about how you're able to use those tools. Like with a bunch of art movements or art materials you can use, like they might be terrible for someone else, but amazing for someone else, you know. But one thing that really is important in art is the artist itself, which leads into my next question. What happens when the artist is a robot? Which is specifically what's been happening lately in art, like art social media, art advertising. People and companies have started using AI in order to replace art workers and anyone, and just people hate it. They think it's soulless, they think it's just a slap in the face to people who make genuine art. And as someone who has dabbled in art for so long, what is your opinion on the current rise of AI art?
Yeah. As an older gentleman, like we mentioned a few times now, you know, I was not born a digital native, so new technologies don't necessarily come naturally to me. But I'm lucky professionally that many of the courses I teach, competitions my students compete in, shows that we participate in, actually have banned the use of AI. For example, the College Board that runs AP Art and Design, they say you can't use AI for any step of the creative process. So not like brainstorming even, or coming up with designs and things like that. So in that sense, I'm sort of shielded from it. And instead, you know, my job is to encourage people to find their passion and to want to generate their own ideas and to want to put in the hard work to bring their ideas to life. Because it is work, but it's also, I think, the most amazing part of my job is to be able to see people find what they really want to do and to go through that process of bringing it to life. It's just kind of magical. And to see humans working that magic, I think, is nice, and it keeps me inspired. I'm not anti-robot, you know. I think I would love it if robots were all art robots. But I think it's also important that humans continue to create. And that is going to only continue to feed what AI has to draw from, because the more product that humans generate, the more AI has to inform its creations as well. So hopefully there'll always be humans helping to move the creative world forward, even if there's robots to process that and be a mirror of it back to us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, you know, response, and it's an interesting question in itself, because some people want to be either all for it or all not for it. You know, there's a lot of, you know, gray area in between of where does AI stray away and becomes not good, but also AI can be used for good. So I like that your answer to the question is very nuanced, you know, because there is no one answer for AI. You know, AI is kind of a big and like scary thing for some people, but it does have uses to it, is what I'm hearing from you. It just like shouldn't take over the art experience. Mainly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of teachers that have embraced it, and we've even had training about some of the options out there. But like I said, I'm just sort of shielded from that because of the rules that make me have to kind of eliminate it as an option.
And, you know, one thing I'm really curious about in this next question is, you were talking about in your last question how you mainly try to connect to your students and like find what they love. And one of the things you do for that is the Visual Arts Classic competition. That's actually coming up in February. But for the people who don't know what Visual Arts Classic is, could you give them a synopsis of what that is?
Ooh, I'll try. And I'll maybe start by mentioning that you are a previous state medal winner from the Visual Arts Classic. But I'll explain it for the audience since you already know about it. So it is an interscholastic competition, kind of like sports, but it's a visual arts team. And students compete both as individuals, making art ahead of the competition in a category of their choosing, like drawing, painting, sculpting, video, those kind of things. And then they also create a second piece of art at the competition in about 2.5 hours, which is pretty amazing in itself. And their score on their individual art goes towards the team total. And then the team also competes as a group, making a work of art in what's called the Creative Thinking Challenge, where the whole team has to work together to produce a single work of art based on a challenge that they're given at the competition. And then the last category, which is also full team, is Quiz Bowl, where we have studied artists based on that year's theme and art movements, and they have to compete in a quiz bowl against the other schools. And so taking first in any of those categories can advance to state. Individuals can go, teams can go for the team categories, and then the overall point total team winner advances as well. And we're very lucky that since I started coaching in 2001, 2002, we've been to state, at least some of the team or the full team, every single year since then. So it's pretty amazing the work that students have put in over the years, because it's a lot of work doing all the research, the preparing, being brave enough to go to the competition and make those things. So yeah, I really enjoy VAC. It's a lot of fun.
I know personally, like you mentioned, that I have placed in VAC last year, is that it is very a mixed bag, but I really love it. Yeah, the challenge where you have to make an art on the spot can be really stressful, but once you really figure out what you want to do and what your story is going to be, then it is really fun to work on, because you get to skip school at least and just make art for a couple hours. And
it's an approved field trip.
And having the quiz bowl and the critical thinking challenge really lets you connect to your peers that you usually don't connect with, and from all different grades, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Just letting all 4 of those grades interact and learn from each other is really nice.
That's a good point. There's a lot of bonding that goes on, and it can create long-term friendships. And much like the New York trip can do that too. And I think like the New York trip, VAC, because it forces you to do the research on those artisan movements, that often can become a very memorable, lifelong inspiration too, that somehow those artists that you learn to connect with and learn to mesh with your own style as you're making your individual pieces, I think it does create a really interesting bond. It's kind of fun seeing former students come back, and VAC is always one of the things that they remember most vividly.
Well, thank you very much for answering all these questions I have for you. Next, we're going to move on to our next segment, Audience Question. Before the show, I went to friends, colleagues, and even family of Mr. Pawl to ask them what kind of questions they'd want to ask him. Of course, they're all appropriate, and they're all very interesting. So we'll get to Pawl. Let's begin with this segment. My first question comes from a fellow colleague of yours, Mr. Bill Green. He has the question for you of, what is your favorite part of teaching / brings you the most happiness at school?
It's those aha moments like we were talking about a little bit earlier. When people finally discover what it is they really want to be doing, not just an assignment they have to do, but how can they put themselves into their art, and just the way that starts to take off, that I think that never gets old. Even though I get old, that never gets old.
Yeah, well, that's really good to know, just, because I know for some people, just thinking about having to teach for so long, they're like, how do you keep doing this and still enjoying it? But you're able to meet so many different students who have so many skill sets, or just things they like to do. Some people like digital, some people like oil, or just some people like cardboard, myself.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to meet so many different students who have so many different skill sets and ambitions.
And that's the joy of the art room, isn't it? Whatever you're bringing in there, that's okay. Whoever you are, whatever your passion is. That's really exciting. Yeah.
My next question for you comes from an anonymous student who is currently at Watertown High School. Their question is, how do you keep an open mind when it comes to knowing / understanding students?
Yeah, I think an important thing is, and I'm old enough, this might seem impossible to believe, but I try to think back to when I was in high school because when I first graduated high school, my thought was I don't ever want to be an art teacher because I remembered the way I behaved in art class. And even to my favorite teacher of all time, Miss Onrud, Ruth Onrud, if you're watching WatertownTV, you rock. I just remember how naughty we were. Like, I remember one time at lunch, me and my buddies snuck into the art room and like stacked all of the tables and chairs into a giant pyramid. And like, as a teacher now, I know how annoying that must have been to her, you know. So like, why would we do that? Because we thought she was awesome. So I just think, just remembering that people are people, you know, I think can help, and thinking in that way keeps you grounded, you know. There's more going on than just what's happening in that one classroom. And just trying to understand and meet people where they're at, I think. Yeah.
For a less deep question I have for you, this also comes from an anonymous person. Very straightforward. What is your favorite band?
Oh, that's not straightforward. That's kind of impossible. You know I like Coheed and Cambria, and that's probably what got me this spot on this show. And interestingly, it was a former student, when they were a student, who introduced me to that band. Not directly, but like played their music for me. A lot of cool bands I get from my students. But there's so many, it's impossible, I think, to narrow it down. I'll say the band I traveled the furthest to see. How about that?
Sure.
Okay, so there's this Japanese band called Maximum the Hormone, who has done theme songs for various animes. My wife is a huge anime fan. I run the anime club at the high school. And this band does not like America or Americans, so they never come here. So my wife really wanted to go see them, so we went to England to go check them out. And it was amazing. It was a really good show. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like, I know I personally also really love Coheed and Cambria. It's not the reason you got onto the show, but it was just an amazing connection that, like, you know, when I first told you about it, that you were like, oh yeah, I also know them. I love them as well. So like just making that connection, which kind of goes back to that other question of how do you connect to students, it doesn't have to be specifically art related or like just what they're doing. It could be something as simple as a band you listen to, or like, you know, just liking the same kind of foods. Like, because when you connect to students, it doesn't have to just be class related. It could be just regular everyday related.
Yeah, I agree. And as an older guy, which we mentioned that a few times on this show, you know, I think it keeps me learning new things always, to learn from people like yourself, you know. And so those discoveries keep life rich and interesting, I think.
And for one last question I have for you that talks about mainly motivation is from actually my sister, who was a former student, Sydney Rodriguez. She graduated in the class of 2020. She was wondering, what motivates you to create art, and how do you share that motivation with your students?
Ooh, okay. One thing that I think actually people help me stay motivated. So a lot of times when I'm painting portraits, because, you know, with the oils, I'm trying to get to a looser place where I can do sort of impressionist portraits and things. A lot of times it's connecting with people that keeps me motivated, whether it's family and friends that I'm painting pictures of, or whether it's fellow artists that I kind of share my progress shots with and say, hey, what do you think? You know, sort of keeping, it's a way to sort of stay in touch with people, and that keeps me motivated to produce, getting that feedback, and eventually presenting the product that I make sometimes to those people and things like that. I think that's kind of magical. And so finding that passion, finding those connections for myself personally as an artist is a big part of it. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, how do you share that motivation you get for making art with your students?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the discussion of getting them to find what they're excited about, but also, you know, the fact that we're in art class together, because you don't have to take art class to make art. You could sit at home in your bedroom and just do whatever you want to do. But making the art classroom a place like what I do with people over the phone, sharing what I'm working on or sending them pictures or whatever, being able to do that in person directly in a classroom, that's amazing, because then you have your peers, you have your teachers, and you can sort of keep one another motivated and keep getting that feedback loop from one another as well, and kind of encouraging, because everybody has their own inner critic. Like, everybody always thinks their art is worse than it is. and I don't know why, but it's just human nature. So to be able to be surrounded by other people who are experiencing that same struggle, but at the same time they're seeing your art with their eyes, and they're going to tell you, no, that's actually good, like, and this is what I like about it. And so that kind of encouragement and feedback, I think, it makes the art room just a really joyous place to be. And that can be motivating, you know, and help you get past those voices saying this is no good, or, you know, or give up on that piece or whatever.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for answering these questions from these anonymous people, or even people that I've listed before. For our next segment I want to go into, it will be guest demonstration, where our guest shows off what skills they can bring to the table.
I have something for you.
You have something for me?
Yeah, I have something for you. Keep
Really?
the cameras rolling.
Keep the cameras
Keep the
rolling.
cameras rolling.
He has something for me.
So 5 years ago, when I was on the other version of the show, my demonstration was to do a portrait of the hosts live on camera. This time we wanted to go in a musical direction, but I thought it wouldn't be fair if you didn't get a portrait. So I did a little oil painting portrait of an Evan Rodriguez, and that's for you, so you can
That is
have
amazing. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome. It was an honor to do it.
It reminds me of so many of the paintings you've done. Like, I know in the classrooms for Mrs. Strobel, there's one of her that looks exactly like this. But
Yeah.
there's something I need to tell you. I have a gift for you as well.
Whoa, okay,
Let
okay.
me grab it next, if I can find it. I'm doing this for every single person who decides they want to come on For the Record. My gift for you is a gift every person who comes on For the Record will get. Your very own For the Record vinyl decoration.
Wow.
You can hang this up on your wall. It does not play music, sadly.
Oh, okay.
But it looks very pretty.
We have at least one record collector in the audience right now over there. My drummer, Chris Lubinski. You don't have one of these though. I got one of these now. That's awesome. Thank you.
And from For the Record and Watertown TV, let me introduce you to Sweetheart Tripwire.
What I saw you this morning, you were wearing that dress. I know you didn't see me. I was staring at your eyes. What did you see? How did you feel? These are questions, baby. One of my mind. When I saw you with him, you did seem to care. That smile's on your lips, my heart's in the air. What did you see? How did you feel? These are questions, baby. One of my mind, oh yeah. Maybe it's better this way. Just ran out there and say, love me day by day, but I still want you. Want you to stay. Said I want you to stay.
complete opposite of an oldie. They've never played it before. We wrote a new song in honor of Watertown called Wu-Town Blue. And I brought a Wu-Town jacket, but there isn't time to go get it. So imagine I'm wearing Wu-Town Blue. Okay? Oh, and imagine this works. One left. One. That string really wants to be an F sharp, but I don't want that string to be an F sharp. There we go. Good enough. Okay. Some people call me a trip from Watertown. Some people call me a trip from Watertown. Well, I know I'm a gossip, I don't let it get me down. Ain't nobody alive gonna noodle us. Ain't nobody around gonna noodle us. You better watch out now, here comes guys with guns. It's wearing Wu-Tang blue. 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 Ain't gonna take it all. It's the first time you guys ever played that song. It's in honor of Watertown. It's in honor of Watertown TV. It's in honor of For the Record with Evan Rodriguez, and we are so pleased to be here and to jam with you guys. Thanks for having us.
All right. It has been amazing talking with you, Mr. Pawl, and that performance you did was spectacular. And I have one more question for you. It's more of, could you tell me a story? And for this segment, it is Childhood Rewind. You know, everyone's been a child before, and most of the time when you're talking with either a teacher or just an adult, they don't really tell you about your childhood. So I want to ask you today, Mr. Pawl, is there an interesting or hilarious story from your childhood you would like to tell us?
Oh boy. Well, I suppose it should be art related maybe. This was a formative moment when I was a young lad trying to decide, you know, art or music as a pathway. Because at some point in your schooling, you almost have to make those choices. In the end, as an adult, I've chosen both, right? But professionally, the art side. So I'll go with an art story. You know, I was very lucky because I had very encouraging parents who would, you know, get art supplies. They would put frames on things that I brought home, even things that maybe didn't deserve frames. But I was also very lucky that I had some really cool art teachers. And my middle school art teacher, Mr. Whitehaven, if you're watching Watertown TV, you rock. And I remember this. He let me make a ginormous sword. And I thought that was the coolest thing. We had to do like a cardboard sculpture. And I was into, you know, nerdy games and fantasy fighting and things like that. And so being able to be allowed to make this epic sword was like a game changer for me. And like, I was just kind of hooked on art after that. I don't make swords anymore. I do portraits now mostly, but it was a turning point. It kind of hooked me in, which was cool.
How big was the sword? Because you say gigantic, but I've seen some gigantic crafted swords.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, my sister, Sydney, she personally crafted a sword for a cosplay of Final Fantasy VII Cloud Sword, which that was gigantic. It sat in her basement for a while before she took it apart. How could you like stand up and make like a kind of like?
So how tall was middle school, Mr. Pawl? I suppose it was probably about this tall.
That tall?
Yeah.
Really?
I think so. I think it would have been taller than me at the time.
And do you think?
But
like,
I'm sure Sydney's was better.
What do you think the sword was proportional to it? Because I know the cloud sword is tiny handle, giant blade, but like
Yeah, this would be more like, medieval broadsword kind of a
so
kind
the
of a
so the
design.
handle was gigantic.
Yeah. Not to scale with middle school me.
Not to scale.
More of an art object.
Maybe
so
it's
to
more
speak.
to scale if you were a literal giant.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, it was very nice having this interview with you, Mr. Pawl. And if anyone that you know or even yourself want to come onto the show for an interview, you can email me personally at fortherecordwtv@gmail.com. Until then, I'm Evan Rodriguez, and I bid you a good evening.